Yeah, that's more like it. Oh yeah, everything's way sexier now. Up front, it has disc brakes, and previously I painted the calipers in a previous video, but the rotors, I've got new ones to go on, so might as well. I painted them yesterday. I think it's the same color. I guess we'll find out. It turned out pretty good. The calipers were pretty good condition. This side here actually needed a new wheel bearing, and the wheel bearing is a little bit sloppy on this side, so that's one reason, probably the main reason why I'm doing this. Objects in mirror are more awesome than they may appear. Well, I got the rears done. They look a lot better. They're brand new drums. Now for the front, it's going to be a little more involved because the caliper has to come off, the wheel bearings have to be changed. There's a hub seal that holds the grease in. So I guess I'll start by taking off the old stuff. Now that I've got the wheel off, one of the first things I'm going to do is remove the two bolts that holds the brake caliper on, because it clamps onto the rotor. The rotor won't come off with that on. So there's two bolts that goes through from the backside, and I'm using a 3/8 Allen or a 3/8 hex. There's lots of meat on the brake pad, caliper's good. These are some interesting pins. The threads are way up here by the head. Oops, better not drop it in the dirt. You're gonna have to be careful when I remove the caliper. You don't want to suspend the weight. The caliper is kind of heavy, and you don't want to hang it off the flex line because it's hard on the flex line. There's the second bolt there. And then I'll set the caliper either up here or on the lower control arm. You can hang it from a bungee cord or a wire. You just don't want it hanging on the flex line. Those brake pads look like brand new almost. Okay, so I took the bolts out of the caliper here and I pulled it off of the rotor. It's just sitting on this ear. There's an ear on the spindle knuckle, so it's just sitting there. That way it's not putting any pressure on the flex lines, or it's not hanging off the flex line. There's a clip here, but I didn't remove it. I thought about removing it for a little more wiggle room, but it seems to be okay there because the rotor should clear that. It should come off there. So this hubcap has to come off. It's just pressed on. This one here has a little bit of wiggle slop in the bearing. So I've got new bearings, new rotors, new races. I guess I'll take off this spacer. Two-inch spacer, same as the rear. So the tools that I've selected for this part of the job are really minimal. I have a flat screwdriver, a hammer, and vice grips. That's it. You don't even need vice grips. An adjustable channel lock type wrench would be just fine. So there's a cotter pin going through here, and I need to straighten it out the best I can in order to remove it. And then I'll just grab it over here and pull it out. There's the cotter pin. that goes through this castle nut. I like to take this stuff, this greasy stuff, and drop it in the cap like that. And this castle nut, it won't be very tight, just tight enough so it doesn't ruin the tapered bearings. These have tapered bearings, so I should be able to remove it with the vice grips, no problem. Yeah, I can just pretty much spin it with my fingers almost. And as I spin this nut off, the tapered bearings are allowing the whole hub to go loose. So it might slide off, so watch it. And the tapered bearings and washer right here, they might slide off. There's the castle nut. I'll drop it in the same hubcap. If you're going to reuse this, you want to be careful because there's a seal on the back side, and I'll show you that in a minute. So you want to pull it out like straight if you can and try to support it a bit. Pull it straight off the spindle. And this bearing here may or may not fall out. So I'll just dump that bearing out. So I got the bearing and everything, all the greasy stuff in this cap. And I'll just set the cap down somewhere. This is the spindle, and this is the rotor. Now in the back side there's another bearing and there's a seal here, and this seal holds the grease back, so you want to be careful if you're going to reuse it. So I only used a couple of tools, a small handful of tools. I tried to keep all the greasy stuff in here. So there's the bearing and nut and cotter pin. So there are two bearings. There's an outer and an inner bearing. So these roller bearings here, they actually ride on that inner race. They don't ride on here per se. This race slides onto here. There. So they roll on their own race here, but this race fits onto this one. And these are cheap. They're only like 10 bucks each at the parts store or something. So that's a pretty cheap wheel bearing, but you need two. You need the inner and the outer. So it's like 20 bucks per side. Those are the good old days. Okay, out with the old and in with the new. You'll see here that there's the seal and the bearing, and this one is just empty. But these Delco, this is the Delco, AC Delco factory OEM type stuff, and it has a race in there already, the tapered bearing race, which is good. Same with the front side, the race is already there. These are some National bearings, and they come with the outer race, but I don't need them because the outer race is already in there. You can see the tapered race in there. So I'll just take the bearing and not the race. This is one side, so you got your inner bearing, your outer bearing, and your seal. So these bearings come like this, and ta-da, it just fell apart. So this is the race that it rides on. And sometimes when the bearings go bad, the race will get ruined and they need to be changed. So that's why they come with this. You can put this into your old rotor if you want, but I'm glad that the Delco ones come with races already, so this should just drop right in there. Yeah, and it rides on that tapered race. These bearings need to be packed with grease, so I'll have to get some grease and pack them. And I'll stick some grease just in the cavity here. So that has to go in there. And when the seal goes in, you'll see it has a lip on the outside, so it only goes in one way. When that goes in, the bearing can't come out. And I've showed how to do this previously to put in these seals, but basically I just tap them in very carefully, and they're just a press fit, and they have this seal on around the outside and the seal on the inside. So I showed how to do that on the tailstock of the Firebird transmission. This is pretty much the same. Okay, I packed the bearings with grease, loaded them up as good as I could, and I'll put some grease just in the hub as well. I got the seal in there and the other bearing in there, and I got it all loaded up with grease. I brought this brass punch here. Brass is soft, so if you're tapping in a seal, it should be easy on the seal. And I also brought this, which is like the same size as the seal, so I could tap on the whole thing without putting a dent in any certain spot. So that one's, I think it's ready to go. I got the new one here, and it's all loaded up with grease and bearings. I'll just make sure this front bearing doesn't fall out on me, and I'll have to be careful with the seal when I put it on. So I'm going to reach into my pile of stuff in the hubcap, and I'm going to need this washer here. It has a keyway on it, so it only goes on one way. And the big nut. I'm just going to put it on finger tight for now. I got these here. They're like welding clamps, and they work pretty good for returning the caliper, the piston on the caliper. So I'll remove this inner brake pad. And stick it in here, and I'll squish the piston back a little bit. There is a tool for this, for pushing the piston back, but it doesn't look anything like this. However, this does work very well for a single piston. This is just a single piston caliper. Stick the brake pad back in there. So much brake dust. Oh yeah. Okay, there she is. She's looking pretty good. And I went and got 1/16" socket, 1/16" for this castle nut, and I rotated the hub, and I slowly tightened it up, just holding the ratchet just like this. I'm not using any leverage, just held it with a really short handle up close, and I just tightened it just until it was snug. And I checked for slop in the bearing. I don't want it too tight, just a little more than finger tight. You remember how easy it came apart? So I think that was a little bit too loose, but like I said, you don't want to torque it down either. It's a tapered bearing. You just want to take the slop out of the bearing, and that'll allow for expansion and grease and everything to work. So I put the cotter pin back through. I can rotate it by hand, but it's tight enough that there's no slop anywhere in the bearings. Put the caliper back on. There's 2 sleeves in the back of the caliper, and I had to adjust the sleeves a little bit to get the caliper on, but that's no big deal. Everything's good here. So I can put the cap on. It just taps on, similar to the seal, similar to how it came off. We'll just tap it on with a hammer and try not to dent it. And then I gotta go do the other side, but it's just gonna be the same as this. And see you smile. Oh yeah, that's a nice smile you got there, buddy. That's a good one. Okay, just torqued down the caliper bolts, and I got the hubcap on there. I just reused the old one. It's actually in really good condition. I could have painted the hubcap, but oh well, it's just bare metal. That's okay. So everything looks pretty good here. A lot better than the crusty old rotors and drums. And I think it's the same color as the sway bar links and calipers. Now I just got to put the wheel back on. I torqued down this spacer. There's no e-brake up front, so I did it a little bit differently. I've shown this before, but I just take a screwdriver down in these vents here, preferably a big square, like the strongest screwdriver that will fit, and I just let it come around and I just let it hit here, and yeah, and then that stops it from rotating. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's more like it. That's way more better. I've been tinkering with the bird box last couple days. It's actually on the ground, which is very strange if you've been following it. And it's, yeah. So took it out on the driveway last night and did another load test. If you didn't see the painting the brake calipers, if you didn't see that video, then all you have to do is figure out what's the matter for yourself and go back and watch my old videos. And yeah.